I remember the first time I wandered into the forest alone. The fog was thick, curling around the trunks like pale fingers, and every step I took sank into a carpet of damp leaves. The sun had already dipped behind the hills, leaving the world in a dim, silver-gray half-light. There was a hush here, a silence that felt almost alive, punctuated only by the distant hum of something I couldn't name. I thought I could hear whispers, carried on the wind, soft and fleeting, vanishing as soon as I turned my head. The path narrowed suddenly, flanked by trees that seemed taller than memory allowed. My flashlight flickered, casting shadows that moved just beyond the edge of vision. I felt, rather than saw, eyes watching me. Somewhere, a branch snapped, but not from my steps. I paused, heart slowing, breath fogging the cold air, and then I saw it. A silhouette at the far edge of the fog, pale and still, unmoving, as though it had always been there waiting. I took a cautious step forward, curiosity tugging at the fear curling in my chest. A faint sound reached me, something like crying or maybe laughter, but it came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. That's when I realized the path behind me had vanished. The trees were closer now, suffocating. I never should have stepped this far, and yet I couldn't turn away. That's when I saw it. The pine grove stretched endlessly. Twilight draped itself across the needles, turning each tree into a dark silhouette. The air smelled of damp earth, sharp and cold against my skin. A wind moved through the branches, soft, almost like words. I thought I heard my name. Step by step, I followed a narrow path. The ground was littered with needles that muffled my feet, yet every step seemed louder in my chest. A flicker of pale light danced between the trees. It vanished as soon as I blinked, leaving only the slow sway of shadows. I paused. The whispers shifted, hissing over the rustling pines, too soft to catch fully, but close enough to make me shiver. The smell of smoke hit me, faint, lingering, a campsite long forgotten. The fire pit was cold, gray ash like dry bones. A single boot lay at the edge of the clearing, mud-caked, torn at the seams, as if its owner had vanished mid-step. I knelt, letting my fingers brush the leather. Cold, abandoned, a whisper curled around my neck like a ribbon. Behind me, something moved, a rustling, deliberate, slow. I held my breath. The wind shifted, carrying a hum I could almost follow. The pine scent thickened. Needles pressed against my arms, sticky with evening dew. And still, the pale light flickered, teasing. I took a step forward. The whispers grew sharper, names half familiar, slipping just out of reach. The boot's mate was nowhere. The circle of the campsite felt tighter, though the grove stretched endlessly in every direction. A branch snapped behind me. My heart jumped into my throat. I didn't dare turn. Not yet. The whispers stopped. An unsettling silence filled the space between the trees, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I noticed the frost forming on the pine needles. It glistened in the fading light, a quiet, cruel beauty. The hum returned, low and distant. Not quite a voice, not quite the wind. Something was waiting, just beyond the reach of the light. I wanted to move, but my feet felt rooted in the soft earth. The rustling behind me persisted, but no shape emerged. I closed my eyes, letting the cold seep into my bones. The wind carried another whisper. A name, so familiar it made my chest ache. When I opened my eyes, the pale light was gone. The shadows stood closer now, pressing in silently. I took one careful step forward. The earth crunched underfoot, and the whispers trailed behind me, fading, as if disappointed I was leaving. I left the campsite behind, but the wind followed. Each pine seemed to lean closer, watching, listening. By the time I reached the edge of the grove, the darkness felt alive. The whispering didn't stop. It lingered on my skin, soft as fog. I turned once. Nothing moved, and yet I could feel it. Eyes unseen but present, silent, patient. The grove swallowed the last traces of light. I walked on, breath shallow, carrying the memory of names that were not mine, and a single boot left behind. The path narrowed. Gnarled branches leaned close, brushing my arms with a cold, rough touch. Even the fog seemed thicker here, clinging to my clothes and hair. Shadows stretched along the ground, too long, bending in ways the trees shouldn't. They reached toward me, soft and slow, like fingers brushing over my ankles. A deer stood frozen ahead. Its eyes glowed, bright and pale in the mist. It didn't move. It simply stared. And I felt watched. The air smelled damp and earthy, heavy with decay. Each breath pulled the forest deeper into me, as if I were sinking into its green darkness. Something shifted at the edge of my vision. I turned, but there was only fog. And then the hollow of a tree. Its bark was blackened. Oh, but the hollow, it pulsed. A soft thrum, like a heartbeat just beneath the surface. I pressed my hand to it. The wood felt alive, warm, and the pulse echoed through my palm, through my chest. The deer blinked once, slow and deliberate, and the glow faded into the mist. I swallowed hard. The silence that followed was heavy, almost too complete. The branches seemed to close in. Rustling needles brushed my face. A faint hum lingered, almost like a whisper breathing behind me. I stepped forward carefully. The ground felt uneven, roots curling underfoot like sleeping snakes. Every step stretched the shadows further, making the fog twist and shiver. The hollow tree pulsed again, softer this time. It called to something in me, something quiet and restless. I turned back, and the path behind me looked different, longer, narrower. Shadows had shifted while I wasn't looking, curling along the edges, patient, waiting. I breathed slowly. The mist carried a faint scent of smoke and wet pine. It clung to the air around me, and I could feel it seeping into my skin. A branch snapped far ahead. I froze. The sound didn't echo like it should. It absorbed into the fog, leaving nothing but a lingering hum in its place. The hollow trees pulse slowed, but it didn't stop. Each beat was a quiet warning, a rhythm I couldn't shake. Something moved beyond my sight again. Slow, patient. I could sense it, watching from just out of reach. The deer's eyes returned for a fleeting moment in the mist. Bright, cold, and then gone. I followed the path with careful steps. The branches scratched my arms. The fog pressed against my face. The pulse of the tree followed me, like a secret rhythm buried beneath the forest floor. The shadows seemed almost to breathe now, shifting softly with each of my steps. I didn't dare look too long. The forest had patience. I stopped. The hollow tree behind me pulsed faintly, a heartbeat fading but never gone. The path stretched onward, narrow, twisting, and I felt it waiting, something quiet and unseen, just beyond the mist. I stepped forward. The silence followed me, soft, alive, and I carried the rhythm of that hollow pulse with me as the fog swallowed the trail behind. The fog lay thick over the pond, water glassy, unbroken, holding the pale light like a mirror. The air smelled damp, mossy, with a hint of something colder beneath it. My breath hung, soft, between the trees. I stepped closer. Ripples formed across the surface, though no wind stirred the mist. Each ripple stretched, slow and deliberate, as if the water remembered something long gone. I knelt at the edge. The mud clung to my fingers, cool and sticky, beneath the fog. I thought I saw shapes, shadows that shifted just beyond reason. Then, splashing from under the water, slow, gentle, and yet the pond was empty. Nothing moved, and still the splashes came. I drew back, shivering. The fog pressed closer, thick against my skin, curling into my hair and down my collar. The reflections changed. Trees bent in impossible angles. Shapes swirled with a pale light, and for a moment I swore I saw a face that wasn't mine, watching from below. A hum rose from the mist, soft, low, vibrating through the air and water. I pressed my palm to the surface. Cold, smooth, alive. The hum seemed to answer me, a rhythm tied to something hidden deep beneath the glassy surface. My shadow stretched across the pond, but the reflection behind it did not match. It twisted, elongated, curling like smoke, and the fog seemed to whisper in patterns I could almost follow. A leaf floated by, motionless, then suddenly spiraled down as if caught by a hand beneath. I froze. The pond held its breath with me. A faint smell of rot lingered at the water's edge. Not strong, just enough to prick my senses, to remind me that this quiet was not simple. I leaned closer. The shapes shimmered again. I could see forms that shouldn't exist, limbs bent wrong, faces blurred, moving under the surface without ever breaking it. A splash again, louder this time. The ripples widened, and in the fog, I thought I saw something rise just above the water, then vanish before my eyes. The mist swirled, dense as wool, and the forest beyond the pond seemed to lean in, listening. Every rustle, every faint movement felt deliberate, as if the pond had its own pulse, watching, waiting. I took a careful step back. The fog curled around my ankles, and the water held my reflection perfectly still, or almost. The shadow behind me stretched, long, thin, not quite matching my own. I held my breath. The hum in the fog softened, rippling through the water like a secret heartbeat. Nothing moved, and yet I felt it. The pond was alive in silence, and I was not meant to stay. I turned slowly. The mist swallowed the path behind me. The air smelled of wet earth, pine, and something faintly metallic. The pond remained glassy and patient, its surface waiting unbroken, and I carried a memory of its quiet rhythm as I walked away, alone, with the fog pressing softly at my back. The fog thinned as I reached the clearing. An abandoned cabin loomed ahead, windows dark and hollow, like eyes that had watched centuries pass. The air smelled of old wood, damp and sharp. The ground beneath my feet was soft, giving slightly with each step. A branch scraped across the roof, and I shivered at the sudden, dry crack. The door creaked open, slow, patient, as if inviting me inside. I hesitated. The wind carried the scent of dust and something warmer, faint, lingering, like smoke from a fire long dead. I stepped across the threshold. The floorboards groaned beneath me, but the cabin felt alive. Dust coated every surface, soft and thick, yet a faint warmth radiated through the air, pressing against my skin in a way that didn't make sense. A window pane rattled, not from wind. I held my breath, listening to the silence swell around me. Furniture stood frozen in time, chairs tilted, tables scarred with age, but the air smelled of something lived, something human. Footsteps echoed from the attic, slow, measured. I froze, heart tightening, feeling the hum of the cabin vibrate through the floor beneath my feet. The shadows in the corners shifted. I thought I saw a coat draped over a chair sway slightly, though no breeze moved it. I ran my hand over a table. Cold, rough, and yet the warmth lingered around me, pressing softly into my palms and the back of my neck. A floorboard creaked above me again, soft, intentional. The attic was empty, and yet the footsteps continued, a rhythm echoing in the quiet. I moved forward. The air smelled faintly of smoke and old pine. Dust rose in small clouds around me. The cabin seemed to breathe with every cautious step I took, as if waiting for something I couldn't name. A chair tipped over behind me. I didn't turn. The sound lingered in the stillness, pale and hollow. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Each step hummed beneath my weight. The air grew warmer, thick with the scent of forgotten things, linen, wood, and something sharper. The attic was empty, yet the warmth pressed closer, like a hand brushing my shoulder. Soft footsteps traced around the room, circling, patient, unseen. I leaned against the wall, breath shallow. The cabin held its quiet with me. The shadows moved slowly, stretching with the light of the dying sun through the cracks. I felt the pull of the warmth, drawing me toward the corner where the shadows pooled darkest. The hum rose again, low and insistent, a pulse that matched the rhythm of my chest. I stepped back. The door downstairs creaked. The room seemed colder, quieter, and the footsteps faded into silence. I left the attic, walking down the stairs slowly, each board groaning under my careful steps. The cabin exhaled behind me, warmth lingering in the dust, soft as a sigh. I stepped outside. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the edges of the clearing. The cabin waited behind me, dark, hollow, patient, its warmth and whispers lingering in the air long after I walked away. The fog pressed in closer. My phone vibrated lightly, a familiar hum in my pocket. Then the screen went black. No signal, only static. I held it to my ear. Soft whispers filled the line, shifting, incomprehensible, like voices buried under layers of snow. The path behind me felt different. I stopped, Scanning the fog. Footprints stretched across the wet earth. Not mine, and yet perfectly aligned with the steps I had taken. I stepped forward. Each foot sank slightly into the damp soil. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, pressing against my clothes. A faint smell of wet pine, and something acrid drifted through the mist. Shapes moved within the fog. Slowly, deliberately, they twisted, stretching, never fully forming, but always at the edge of my vision. A branch scraped against my arm. I flinched. The static in my pocket hissed, a low, vibrating murmur, like it was breathing alongside the forest. The footprints continued, step for step, perfectly behind me. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing, only fog and shadows, folding over each other. The shapes shifted again. Tall, thin shadows leaning one way, then bending the other. I felt the forest watching, the mist pressing closer with every careful step. I tried to move faster. The static rose in my ear, whispering names I didn't recognize. My heart thudded against my ribs, but the fog seemed to slow me down. I stumbled over roots. Cold mud squished underfoot. The whispers lingered, stretching the quiet until it felt like sound and fog were the same. I turned sharply. The footprints behind me glimmered faintly, as if the earth itself remembered each step I had taken. The forest breathed around me, rustling needles, shifting shadows, a soft hum vibrating through the air. The shapes in the fog grew more defined. Curved limbs, faces blurred and pale. They moved independently of the wind, tracing silent paths along the ground and between the trees. I felt the static pull against me. The whispers rose in volume, a low, twisting chorus that hummed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The fog clung closer, so thick it brushed against my cheeks, settling in my hair. I stopped, took a breath. The footprints behind me ended, but the fog held the shapes, leaning closer, patient and alive. I stepped forward. Each motion felt heavier. The whispers softened, folding into the hush of the forest. The shapes shifted, pulling back just enough to let me pass. The path stretched on. Fog wrapped around my shoulders. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, cold and static thick. I carried the memory of those footsteps behind me, and the soft, unintelligible whispers, as the forest settled into silence. And I walked on alone, each step echoing lightly in the stillness, fog curling around me like a quiet warning. The forest thinned slightly. Night pressed down, heavy and cold. Mist clung to my skin, wet and clammy. Ahead, a pale light swayed. A lantern, small, swinging gently between the trees. Its flame was blue, unnatural, almost liquid in its glow. The scent of wet earth and pine thickened around me. My breath rose in soft clouds, and the hush of the forest wrapped around every step. I followed the lantern, step by careful step. Shadows danced across the tree trunks, elongating, twisting, curling where no breeze should reach. The light moved slowly, always ahead. I felt it pull me, a quiet insistence I couldn't ignore. The hum of the forest seemed to rise, soft, low. The mist shifted, brushing against my arms, wrapped my shoulders in cold, damp fingers. I stepped closer. The ground was uneven, roots hidden beneath the fog. The lantern floated forward, and shadows flitted at its edges, dark shapes that mimicked, then disappeared. Then it vanished. I stopped. The forest swallowed the light. Only mist, only dark. Silence pressed close. Heavy and waiting, I took a slow breath. The lantern flickered again. This time behind me, no sound, no movement, and yet it was there. I turned sharply. The flame blazed blue, hanging just beside me, casting shadows that reached into my chest. A rustling stirred the fog. I felt my skin prickle. Every nerve pulled taut. The hum from the woods vibrated in my bones, soft, insistent. I tried to step back. The lantern followed. Its flame licked the mist, casting shapes across the trees that weren't trees, shapes that leaned closer than they should. The air smelled faintly of something metallic, sharp against the damp pine. I could feel the cold of the night and the warmth of the lantern at the same time. Impossible, unsettling. It hovered beside me, silent. The shadows danced at its edges, and I felt the forest hold its breath with me. I reached out, almost involuntarily. The The flame pulsed softly, like it was alive, and the mist clung closer to my fingers. Then stillness. The blue light didn't move. The forest didn't breathe. And for a long moment, I felt entirely exposed. The lantern swayed gently, and I stepped forward, the mist parting reluctantly around my legs. The flame stayed at my side, patient, its light cold, alien, and unwavering. I walked on, the fog pressing again. Shadows reached, twisting with the blue glow, and the lantern followed silently, a quiet presence that whispered without words. The fog hung low over the trail. My boots sank into the damp earth with each step. Pine needles clung to my clothes, wet and sharp. I saw it first by the roots of a gnarled oak. A backpack, stray crumbs of bread, lay scattered nearby. Fresh, warm to the touch. No one was around. The air smelled faintly of smoke and rain. A hum rose from the mist, low and persistent, as if the forest had paused to watch. I knelt beside the pack. Inside there was more food, wrapped sandwiches, a half-empty water bottle, a small journal. The leather cover was cracked, aged, but the pages inside were worn, almost alive. I opened it. The handwriting trembled across the lines. Someone had wandered here years ago, then never returned. The words lingered in the mist, curling through the fog like smoke. I felt it then. Soft footsteps echoing mine, not matching. Faster, heavier. Step, step, step. But no one appeared in the fog. A rustling brushed against my arms. I turned sharply. Nothing, just the mist weaving through the pines, thick and patient. The air smelled earthy, with a faint tang of something metallic. The journal lay open in my hands. Descriptions of paths, shadows, noises, each word pressing against my chest. The forest seemed to breathe with it. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Yet when I looked behind me, there was only fog, folding over itself like a restless tide. I felt a cold press at my back, a brush of air like someone passing too close. The hum in the woods rose, soft, insistent, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I stood slowly. The backpack lay at my feet, silent. The journal's pages fluttered faintly, as if the forest itself exhaled. I followed the trail, step by cautious step. The footsteps behind me echoed again, matching mine for a moment, then rushing ahead, heavier, pressing the fog with presence I couldn't see. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the trail. Tree trunks bent in impossible angles, and shapes flickered at the edges of my vision. I caught glimpses of figure, tall, blurred, almost transparent, vanishing when I tried to focus. The backpack remained, unclaimed, yet somehow alive in the mist. I could feel the eyes of the lost hiker in the air, watching, waiting, trailing just behind each of my steps. I reached for the journal again. The pages were filled with instructions, warnings, and dates, all trailing off, unfinished. Words evaporating into fog as if the forest had claimed them. The footsteps matched mine again. Closer, heavier. I tried to step faster, but the forest slowed me. The hum of the fog, the rustling of the trees, all pressed against me in quiet insistence. I stopped, breathed. The mist wrapped around my shoulders, soft and cold. The backpack waited at my feet, the journal whispering without voice. The footsteps faded, leaving me with nothing but the fog and the memory of presence. I moved on, every step careful, measured. The forest exhaled softly behind me, and the hum lingered in the air, a quiet pulse of warning. I carried the weight of someone lost, and the knowledge that the footsteps, though gone for now, would follow again. The forest was thick with fog. Twilight lingered, soft and cold, curling into the hollows of the trees. Leaves stirred, not from wind. They lifted, quivering, brushing my arms. Rustling, sighing, alive. I slowed my steps. The earth smelled damp and faintly metallic. Each breath I took mingled with the mist, heavy in my chest, shallow, deliberate. I felt it then, closed behind me, breathing, soft, shallow. Every exhale pressed against my neck, warm and impossible in the chill. Shadows stretched across the forest floor, long, thin, curling like fingers. They reached for the mist, and for a moment I felt them brush my ankles. The leaves shifted again. A carpet of them stirred underfoot, moving as if something invisible paced beside me. I held my breath. The hum of the forest rose subtly, threads of sound weaving through the fog, rustling and breathing, soft footsteps that weren't mine. A branch snapped above me. The fog seemed to thicken at the sound, pressing closer, damp against my cheeks, cooling the warmth that lingered from the earlier day. Shadows stretched further. Tree trunks leaned, bending impossibly, dark shapes folding into mist, mirroring every careful step I took. The breathing stayed. Close. I could feel it in the rise and fall of the air behind me. I didn't dare turn. Not yet. Leaves brushed my arms again, quivering, restless. I stepped forward slowly. The mist parted reluctantly, each footfall swallowed softly by the earth. The shadows stretched higher, elongated and thin, pressing toward the ground and the fog alike. The breathing lingered, shallow, deliberate, and the rustling leaves followed it, picking up a rhythm that matched my pulse. I stopped. The forest held its silence with me. The fog curled around my shoulders, and the air smelled of wet pine and cold stone. I moved again, slow, careful steps. The leaves stilled only briefly, then stirred with intent, as if testing my presence, tracing the path I took. The shadows twisted in the mist. I felt them in the corner of my vision, leaning, reaching, patient. The breathing had faded slightly, but the sense of being followed lingered, a weight pressing along my spine. I paused in a small clearing. The fog swirled softly at my feet, and the leaves settled, almost respectful. Shadows clung to the edges of the trees, folding themselves into silence. The forest exhaled. Rustling and breath faded together, leaving only the chill on my skin, the damp earth beneath my boots, and a quiet tension of knowing I was not truly alone. I walked on, each step measured, careful. The fog embraced me again, and the shadows followed just far enough to remind me that the forest kept its watch, patient, deliberate, and unseen. The fog hung thick over the forest floor. Twilight pressed into the trees, cold and damp. Needles stuck to my boots and clothes, wet with mist. A mossy boulder appeared ahead, large, ancient, draped in green and brown decay. Something about it made the air heavier, as if the forest itself bent toward it. I stepped closer. A hollow revealed itself at the base of the rock. Small, almost hidden, the scent of earth and wet stone drifted up, tinged with something sharp, metallic. Inside, the cavern was narrow, damp, closed. I crouched, brushing moss from the entrance. Tiny carvings lined the stone walls. Figures, people, scenes of disappearance etched into the rock. Someone climbing, someone turning, fading, some reaching out, fingers stretching, then swallowed by the stone. I traced one carving with finger. Cold, rough, the lines pressed into my palm like whispers. A faint hum rose from the rock, low, vibrating in my skull. I sat back, listening. The hum filled my head, echoing with each heartbeat, stretching into the silence of the forest. The fog swirled outside. Shadows of trees leaned closer, folding into the hollow entrance. A rustle of leaves, soft and deliberate, made my skin prickle. The carving seemed to shift, not physically, but in the corner of my vision, lines wavered like smoke. Faces I didn't recognize twisted just slightly, pressing closer to me in the dim light. The hum deepened, not just from the rock, from somewhere inside me, a vibration I could not name. I closed my eyes. The forest, the fog, the hollow rock, all merged into a single, pulsing presence. I leaned forward again, tracing a scene where a figure vanished into nothing. The stone was damp beneath my fingertips, cold, alive in its stillness. The footsteps behind me, none. Yet I felt them, soft, pressing into the earth, echoing my own movements, faster than mine, heavier, folding the forest into silence around me. The carving seemed endless. Every turn of the stone revealed new figures, always disappearing, always leaving nothing but the hollow space behind. I exhaled slowly. The hum subsided slightly, leaving a low, lingering resonance. The forest waited with me. I withdrew my hand. The hollow held its secrets, patient and unyielding. The moss shifted slightly in the dim light. The air smelled of wet stone and pine, a soft tang that clung to my skin. I stood. The fog pressed closer, cool and damp. The rock remained, silent, except for the faint whisper of its hum. I stepped back, each footfall careful, measured. The forest exhaled softly, and I walked on, carrying the memory of the carvings and the subtle, lingering pulse of the hollow rock. The clearing stretched before me. Fog lay heavy, softening the edges of the trees. Twilight clung to the branches, pale and cold. I stepped forward. The earth was damp, moss clinging to my boots. Each footfall pressed lightly into the soil. Then I heard it. Another step, mirrored, perfectly behind mine. I froze. The fog shifted around me. The air smelled of wet pine and damp stone. The echo of footsteps pressed into the stillness. I moved again. Another step echoed behind me. Not quite mine. Not quite any sound I knew. The forest held its breath. Rustling leaves, soft and deliberate, folded the silence into itself. Shadows stretched long across the clearing, leaning, curling like fingers toward the fog. Each step I took felt heavier, echoing against an invisible weight. The mirrored footsteps followed perfectly, slower, patient, deliberate. A branch tapped softly overhead. The fog wrapped around my shoulders, cold and damp against my skin. I felt the mirrored presence in each brush of air. The clearing seemed smaller with every step. Shadows leaned closer. The mirrored steps matched mine, then paused. A faint hum rose from the mist, low, vibrating through my chest. I held my breath. The footsteps resumed, heavier this time, not attacking, but persistent, watching, pressing me forward with silent intent. The fog thickened around my legs. I could see nothing beyond a few paces. The mirrored presence moved with me, always just behind, always patient. Leaves stirred without wind, rustling that pressed against my ears. I felt the air hum with anticipation, the silence around the mirrored steps stretching thin. I stopped. The footsteps did, too. The clearing held its stillness. Shadows leaned, stretching and twisting in the dim light. I exhaled softly. The mist clung to my hair, my skin, cool and damp. The echoed steps faded slightly, but the memory of their presence lingered, heavy and deliberate. I stepped forward again, careful, measured. The mirrored steps followed. The forest remained silent otherwise. No wind, no rustling beyond the soft leaves. Only the hum of the mist, the faint cold press of shadows, and the echo of footsteps that might belong to someone or something just behind me. I walked on. The fog curled around my legs. Each footfall mirrored, echoing in the empty clearing, and the forest watched patient, folding its silence around me, slow, deliberate, unbroken. The fog hung low, soft and thick around the trees. Twilight had slipped further behind the hills. The air smelled damp, earthy, tinged with something faintly metallic. A lantern appeared ahead, pale, flickering light, swinging slowly. Unlike before, it moved away from me, pulling me forward with quiet insistence. I followed, each step pressed into the wet earth, soft and uneven. Leaves rustled underfoot, brushing my ankles. Shadows stretched long and thin across the fog. The lantern drifted through the mist, its pale glow brushing the trunks and the fog alike. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision, shifting, folding, unreachable. The air hummed faintly, not from the lantern itself, but from the forest, or perhaps from the fog that wrapped around me. Every breath felt thick, heavy in my chest. I stepped over roots, careful not to stumble. The lantern moved farther, pausing sometimes, then resuming, as if guiding me through the mist. The shadows clung closer, twisting across the ground, leaning toward the light, curving around my legs in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The clearing opened suddenly. There, in the center, a small shrine, a collection of trinkets, haphazard, quiet, precise. Some seemed human, tiny carvings, teeth, worn bones, some unidentifiable, shapes warped, alien, yet delicate and deliberate. The lantern hovered above, still and patient. Its pale glow softened the edges of the shrine, casting shadows that moved like fingers across the forest floor. I stepped closer. The air smelled of damp pine and old earth, with a faint hint of smoke that seemed recent. Each object hummed faintly, a resonance that vibrated through my fingertips even before I touched it. I crouched, brushing leaves aside. Small carvings, polished smooth with time, arranged with careful intent. Some trinkets looked almost like offerings, placed with reverence I couldn't name. The lantern shifted slightly, casting light on shadows that bent and stretched. I felt a presence, patient and quiet, watching me, waiting for nothing. Rustling stirred behind me. Leaves lifted softly, brushing my arms. The fog pressed closer, cool and damp, but the lantern did not sway. It remained above the shrine, calm and steady. I ran my fingers lightly over the trinkets. The air hummed, low and persistent, and I could feel it through my chest, through the soles of my boots, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. I stepped back slowly. The lantern continued to hover, pale and unyielding. Shadows stretched, leaning, folding. The shrine remained patient, untouched by time. The fog curled around me. The forest exhaled quietly. I could hear the faint whisper of leaves, the hum of earth and mist together, and the soft, deliberate rhythm of my own breath. I turned to leave. The lantern stayed, unmoving above the shrine. The shadows receded slightly, folding into mist, as if giving me space to walk. Each step away was careful, measured. The fog pressed against my shoulders, the air damp and cold. But the shrine and the lantern lingered in my vision, a quiet presence, patient and deliberate, reminding me of something I couldn't name. I walked on, soft footsteps pressing into wet earth. The forest held its silence around me, and I carried a memory of the lantern in the fog long after it vanished from sight. The forest pressed close around me. Twilight had nearly vanished, leaving fog thick and soft between the trees. The thicket ahead seemed alive. Branches twisted unnaturally, leaves quivering though no wind moved them. The scent of damp earth and pine thickened, tinged with something faintly metallic. I stepped closer. Something blinked. Pale eyes, many of them, peeking from the brush. They moved in unison, blinking slowly, deliberately, watching me, unblinking, then blinking again. A low hum rose from the ground. Not the forest, not the wind. It vibrated through my boots, my spine, soft but insistent. The fog curled around my legs, wet and cool against my skin. Shadows pressed into the mist, leaning, folding, reaching without form. I tried to breathe slowly. The eyes did not move, yet I felt them in every glance, every shadow, every pause in the rustling leaves. Branches brushed my arms. A shiver ran through me. The hum grew slightly louder, folding into the rhythm of my heartbeat. The thicket seemed to pulse, branches bending inward slightly, then releasing. Shadows flickered across the fog, stretching unnaturally along the forest floor. I took a cautious step forward. The pale eyes blinked again, and the low hum rose to fill my chest. It pressed against my ears, my temples, a whisper sound I could feel but not hear. Leaves stirred underfoot, rustling, deliberate, patient. I felt the brush against my shoulders, as if something unseen moved in tandem. The fog thickened, swallowing shapes. The eyes remained, blinking, patient, watching, waiting. A branch snapped softly. The thicket shifted slightly. The hum softened but lingered, pressing into my chest, vibrating to the soles of my boots. I held still. The forest exhaled slowly around me. The eyes blinked once more, then vanished behind the dense branches, leaving only shadow and mist. I stepped back. The fog pressed against my legs, cool and damp. The forest returned to silence. Yet the memory of those eyes lingered, a quiet presence pressing at the edges of thought, patient and deliberate, watching even as I moved away. The forest thickened around me. Fog lingered low, brushing the tops of moss-covered roots. Twilight had retreated entirely, leaving the air damp and cold. I stepped onto the path. It should have been familiar. The curve near the old oak, the stone outcrop, gone. The trees had shifted. Branches leaned differently. Trunks twisted where they had once been straight. The scent of wet earth and pine filled the air, heavy and clinging to my skin. Each step felt uncertain. The ground seemed to rise and fall beneath my boots. Leaves rustled softly, though no wind moved them. I turned a corner. The trail looped unnaturally. I recognized nothing. Everything looked both the same and wrong. Shadows stretched long across the fog, fingers of darkness creeping through the mist. I felt the forest pressing closer, patient and quiet, watching each cautious step. That MY sense of direction failed me. Every landmark I remembered vanished. The mossy boulder, the hollow tree, even the faint glow of fading light seemed to shift. I stopped. The fog curled around my ankles, damp and cold. The air hummed faintly, a low vibration that pressed against my chest. Soft footsteps echoed behind me. Or was it only my own, folded strangely by the looping trail? I moved again. Branches brushed my shoulders. Leaves whispered against my boots. The path twisted, folding back on itself, turning familiar shapes into strangers. The silence pressed heavily. Every rustle, every snap of a twig felt magnified, deliberate. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the fog, leaning, folding, waiting. I tried to focus. The forest smelled of wet pine and cold stone, with a faint tang of metal, sharp and distant. Each breath I took felt heavier. The fog curled around my face, soft and persistent. Another turn. The path repeated. I saw a familiar tree, but it was smaller, twisted, wrong. I reached out to touch the bark. Cold, damp, unyielding. The trail looped again. The forest seemed to shift beneath my feet. I could feel the earth move, or perhaps my mind was bending under the weight of the fog. The shadows stretched and folded in the mist. Rustling leaves brushed against my arms, soft, deliberate. I pressed forward, step by cautious step. Each footfall echoed strangely, folded, mirrored, as if the forest itself walked beside me. The path became unrecognizable. I could no longer trust the shape of the trail. Each turn seemed to erase the one before. Familiarity dissolved into uncertainty, and the fog thickened with intent, softly pressing against my shoulders, my cheeks, my chest. I paused. The forest exhaled. Leaves whispered. Shadows leaned, and the low hum lingered beneath the soil, vibrating in my bones. I turned again, carefully, slowly, step by step. The trail stretched endlessly, folding, looping, rewriting itself. And I realized I was truly lost. The forest waited, patient, quiet, and alive. The fog curled around me. Shadows pressed, soft and deliberate. And I walked on uncertain, careful, carrying the weight of forgotten trail, and the silent knowledge that the path might never end. Moonlight spilled across the forest floor, silver and cold, brushing leaves and branches. The fog lay low, curling around roots and moss. Shadows stretched unnaturally in the pale light, thin, long, bending across the ground like fingers. They moved slightly, almost breathing, yet there was no wind to stir them. A low hum rose from the earth, vibrating through the soles of my boots, pressing softly against my chest. It was constant, patient, deliberate. Shapes danced just beyond recognition. Branches swayed in impossible angles. The fog thickened around the twisting forms. I could feel it pressing against my skin, cool, damp, a brush against my arms and neck. The shadows bent further, lengthening across roots, curling around trunks, folding into themselves in ways that seemed alive. The humming deepened. It resonated in my skull, in my chest, in the space between my ribs. Leaves whispered as I stepped forward, soft, measured, echoing the rhythm of the hum beneath the soil. Each movement of the shadows seemed deliberate, folding the light, shaping the fog, dancing just out of reach of my gaze. I felt the forest watching, patient, alive. The shapes twisted at the edges of vision, figures that were not quite branches, not quite earth, something both familiar and wrong. The hum rose slightly, vibrating through the fog, the leaves pressing gently into the soles of my feet. Shadows stretched further, leaning closer, yet never touching. I moved slowly, each footfall careful, measured. The fog pressed against my legs, cold and damp. The shapes continued their quiet dance, folding, twisting, pulsing in time with the hum. A branch brushed my shoulder. The smell of wet pine and earth grew sharp. The shadows leaned closer, stretching over roots and stones, yet never quite meeting me. The moonlight flickered through the fog. Shadows bent, twisted, danced. The hum softened, lingering, pressing into my chest, into hollow of my ears, a whispering vibration I could not name. I paused. The forest exhaled slowly. The fog swirled at my feet. The shapes trembled just beyond sight. The shadows hummed quietly, folding into themselves, patient and deliberate. I stepped forward again. Measured, careful, slow. The shapes continued to dance. The shadows stretched longer, the hum vibrating beneath my feet, as if the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting, and quietly aware of me. The moonlight shifted slightly. The fog curled around my legs, soft and damp. I walked on. The shadows followed their slow, unnatural rhythm. The humming lingered in my chest. And I carried a memory of the dancing forms in the quiet, vibrating dread long after I left the clearing behind. The forest opened to a clearing. Moonlight touched the mossy floor, silver and cold. Fog lingered low, curling around roots and rocks. A massive oak stood at the center, its trunk wide and gnarled, branches stretching toward me, bending slowly, deliberately. The air smelled of damp earth and old wood, with a faint metallic tang that made my skin prickle. I stepped closer. The oak's shadow stretched long across the fog. It seemed alive. A low hum vibrated through the soil beneath my boots, pressing softly into my chest. The bark shifted subtly, not in the wind, not with the fog. Carvings appeared, faces, etched deeply into the oak. Eyes closed, eyes open, mouths frozen in silent screams. I reached out. The bark was rough, damp against my fingertips. The faces seemed to watch me, and I felt their gaze press into my bones. Branches arched closer. The moonlight flickered through them, casting shadows that bent and twisted in impossible ways. I felt the wind in my hair, though the air was still. A faint rustle came from above, leaves brushing one another in slow, deliberate rhythm. The hum deepened, resonating through my chest, through the soles of my boots, through the hollow of my ribs. I circled the trees slowly. Faces shifted with each step, their expressions subtle but deliberate. Some whispered in memory, their carved lips moving in silence. The fog pressed closer. It wound around the base of the oak, curling into roots and hollows, soft and damp against my legs. Branches reached out again, long, skeletal fingers of shadow. The air smelled sharper now, like wet pine mixed with old smoke. I could hear the faint creak of bark, as if the tree shifted under its own weight. I crouched slightly, brushing moss from the base. Faces stared up at me, blank and patient. The hum persisted, low and vibrating, matching my heartbeat. A leaf drifted down, landing at my feet. I felt the tree's presence more than saw it. Patient, waiting, observing. The fog curled around my shoulders, soft and deliberate. I stepped back. The oak loomed larger, branches bending, shadows stretching, faces watching, humming quietly in the night. The forest held its breath. I walked away slowly, every step careful, measured, carrying the quiet weight of being observed, the memory of eyes that never blinked, and a hum that lingered long after I left clearing. The trees thinned suddenly. A clearing opened before me, pale in moonlight. Fog lingered low, curling around roots and rocks. I stepped in. The world went quiet, not softly quiet, but absolute. No rustle of leaves, no distant call of birds, no wind to move the fog. Even my own breathing seemed to vanish. I felt my chest rise and fall, but the sound was gone. The air felt heavy, thick, expectant, pressing against my skin. Shadows stretched long across the clearing. They moved with the fog, slow and deliberate, folding into themselves. The ground beneath my boots felt damp. The scent of wet moss and pine hung thick in the stillness. Every step echoed in my mind, but left no trace in the clearing silence. I raised a hand. No rustle, no creak of my clothing. Only fog swirling around fingertips. Soft, deliberate. A branch swayed. Or maybe I imagined it. No wind stirred it. Shadows shifted in response, stretching toward me, patient, waiting. I moved forward slowly, each footfall measured, careful. The clearing seemed to pulse with quiet expectation, like the fog itself held its breath. The silence pressed into my ears, a weight of nothingness, thick and tangible, as if the forest itself had folded into the clearing, leaving only the still, expectant space. I felt my heart beat loud, my pulse echoing in my chest. Yet no sound emerged. Even my own voice whispered myself, "Die before reaching the air." Shadows leaned closer in the fog. They moved with a soft, impossible rhythm, folding across the ground, stretching toward me, then retreating just out of reach. The air smelled sharper now, wet earth, pine, and something faintly metallic. I held my breath, careful not to break the stillness. The fog pressed against my legs, cool and damp. I paused. The clearing held me in its quiet embrace. Time seemed suspended. Every nerve alert, every sense stretched thin. A leaf drifted slowly from a tree edge. It landed without sound. The fog curled at my feet, soft and deliberate. The shadows leaned closer, folding, stretching, patient and patient. I stepped back. The clearing remained silent, expectant, heavy. No wind, no movement, no breath. Only the weight of stillness, pressing into me, folding around my shoulders, leaving me aware of every tiny detail, every shadow, every pulse of my own chest echoing in the emptiness. I walked on, carefully, slowly. The fog pressed around me. The clearing held its silence, patient and unyielding. And I carried the memory of absolute stillness, long after the edges of the clearing faded into shadow. Fog draped the forest like a thin veil. The moon barely touched the ground, silver pale against wet moss and dark trunks. I walked slowly, each step soft against the damp earth, leaves curling underfoot, rustling faintly, though the fog swallowed the sound. A figure emerged from the haze, human-shaped, faint, almost like smoke. It drifted forward without effort, leaning, bending with the fog itself. I froze. The air smelled of wet pine and cold stone. The figure didn't move toward me, but didn't retreat either. It seemed aware. I stepped closer. The mist brushed my cheeks, cold and damp. The figure wavered, edges blurring, like a candle's flame in a breathless room. I reached out slowly. Fingertips grazed the fog where it had been. It evaporated, curling away like smoke. A faint scent lingered, something earthy, something like old paper, like it had been waiting for me. I stepped forward again. The figure reformed, drifting slightly farther than before. Every movement was slow, deliberate, its presence both empty and full. The hum of the forest changed. Not sound. Exactly. A vibration in my chest, in my skull, in the hollow between my ribs. It matched the faint rhythm of the figure's drift. I moved through the fog, careful, the earth cool beneath my boots, the mist pressing lightly against my legs. The figure remained just beyond reach, ephemeral, teasing. Shadows bent in the moonlight. Trees leaned slightly, branches brushing faintly against one another. The figure swayed in rhythm with the fog, an impossible presence, soft, almost sorrowful. I whispered its name in my mind. No sound came, yet the fog seemed to tremble. The figure paused, edges thickening, as if listening, aware of my longing. I moved closer again. The scent returned, earthy, damp, faintly metallic. The figure stretched upward, reaching like smoke toward the sky, then vanished entirely, leaving only mist curling around my shoulders. I stood alone. The fog pressed soft against my skin. The forest breathed quietly, leaves brushing lightly in the distance. I felt the echo of the figure linger, like a memory etched into the damp air. I walked on slowly, every step careful, measured. The clearing faded behind me, the figure gone, but its presence remained in the chill of the fog, in the rhythm of my heartbeat, in the quiet longing I carried long after it evaporated. The path narrowed. Fog clung to the forest floor, curling around roots and fallen leaves. The air smelled damp and metallic, like rain-stained iron. Ahead, a rusted gate lay broken, its hinges twisted, fallen into the earth, bent like tired bones. The moonlight glinted off sharp edges, pale and cold. Footprints led to the gate, deep impressions in wet soil, but beyond it, nothing. The earth swallowed them whole. I stepped closer. The gate groaned faintly under my touch, rust flakes brushing my fingers. The air hummed low, almost imperceptibly, pressing against my chest. Shadows stretched along the path. Branches leaned closer, bending with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The fog shifted in folds, curling like smoke, swallowing the edges of the footprints. I crouched, tracing one of the prints. Cold mud clung to my skin. The shape was human, but the depth uneven, as if something heavy had passed too. And then nothing. I rose. The forest was silent. Too silent. No wind, no rustle of leaves, only the faint hum beneath the ground. The gate beckoned quietly. Broken wood and iron, pale under the moon, shadowed under the mist. I stepped through. The fog thickened. Every step pressed into soft earth that gave way silently. The footprints disappeared completely, as if the gate had swallowed them. I paused. The air was heavier here, a subtle weight on my shoulders. The forest pressed closer, branches whispering against one another, but no wind moved them. A soft rustle came from behind me. I turned, heart thudding, but nothing moved. Only the gate, fallen and silent, marking the edge of somewhere unseen. I walked on slowly, each step careful, measured. The fog curled around my legs, damp and cool. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The gate receded behind me, a pale silhouette in the mist. Footprints, long erased, left no memory in the soil, only the quiet hum and the soft weight of unseen observation. I stepped forward, leaving the fallen gate behind. But its presence lingered, etched into the fog and the hush of the forest, like a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. The forest thinned as I approached a wooden bridge. Moonlight glinted pale across wet planks, slick with dew and fog. The air smelled of damp wood and river water, sharp and cold against my skin. I stepped onto the bridge. Boards creaked softly underfoot, echoing in the still night. Beneath, the river flowed silent, glass-like, unervingly smooth. Then I heard it, a faint murmur, barely a breath, threads of sound weaving under the bridge. Voices, or something like them, whispering names I almost recognized. I leaned over the railing. The water reflected moonlight, silver and pale, but nothing moved. Yet a shadow streaked across the surface, too fast, too fluid for a fish. It darted, vanishing, leaving only ripples trembling across the glassy surface. I froze. The cold fog pressed against my cheeks, the faint hum of water mingling with the whispers. I could feel the shadow watching, even when unseen. I stepped forward, slow, careful. What groaned beneath me, each movement resonating through the fog. The whispers rose slightly, delicate, fractured, like silk brushing against dry leaves. I paused mid-bridge. The shadow appeared again, swift, impossible, sliding beneath the surface as though the water itself obeyed it. The murmurs became faint echoes of conversation, fragments of words that should not exist. I breathed in slowly, air damp and heavy in my lungs. The river seemed to stretch endlessly beneath me, fog curling above its surface like smoke. Soft footsteps echoed behind me, my own or another's. I couldn't tell. The shadows shifted once more, tracing patterns impossible to follow. A chill ran up my spine, sliding down into my stomach. I leaned closer, peering into the dark water, the faint murmur now almost a song, tinged with longing, sorrow. The reflection of moonlight fractured, showing shapes that move against the current, swimming upstream in silence. I stepped back. The bridge seemed longer, stretching wider, fog wrapping tightly around each post, each rope. The whispers remained, soft, persistent, threading through my thoughts like a low hum beneath the fog. I walked across the rest of the bridge slowly. The shadow vanished for a moment, leaving only the ripple of water and cold fog. But I could still feel it, sliding beneath the surface, watching, waiting, always just beyond the edge of sight. When I reached the far side, the forest swallowed the bridge behind me. The air cleared slightly, but the hum lingered in my chest, a quiet, persistent reminder that the water beneath held something that did not belong. I stepped into the trees. The fog curled around my legs, leaves brushing softly, whispers fading. Yet I could not shake the sense of being followed by something unseen, sliding beneath the surface, waiting beneath the bridge. The forest thinned. A cold wind curled to the bare branches, carrying the scent of wet earth and fading leaves. The ground squished softly under my boots, fog pressing against my legs, chilling the skin. In the distance, a light flickered. Pale, warm, almost alive. A cabin, I thought. Candlelight trembling behind dark windows. I blinked, and it was gone. I paused. Fog thickened. clinging to the trees. My breath rose in slow clouds, mixing with the damp hum of the night. The light returned, then vanished again, dancing just beyond reach. I stepped forward. Leaves rustled underfoot. Branches brushed against my shoulders, cold and whispering, as if they had secrets to tell. Each time I blinked, the cabin shifted, sometimes closer, sometimes swallowed by the fog. The air hummed faintly, a vibration that pressed against my ears and chest. My heartbeat echoed, louder than the night. I tried to focus, squinting through the mist. A door, dark and hollow, seemed to open for a moment. A single candle burned inside. Its flame flickered once, twice, then disappeared into the thick fog. The silence was sharp, stretching, bending around me. Even the wind seemed hesitant. I could hear only my soft footsteps, swallowing the rhythm of my own fear. I moved closer. The fog parted slightly, revealing the shape of the cabin's roof, the shadow of a chimney, a faint glow inside, but not for long. Each blink, each breath, shifted everything. The ground, the trees, the light, nothing stayed where it had been. I reached the clearing. The cabin should have been in front of me, but the fog swallowed it entirely. I spun slowly. A glow flickered at the edge of my vision. I blinked. Gone. The air tasted of damp wood and smoke. A hum rose from the mist, low and trembling. I could feel it through the soles of my boots, through my chest, as though the forest itself was breathing around me. I walked. Branches scraped lightly against my arms. Leaves crunched softly beneath. Every step echoed too clearly, then vanished into nothing. The cabin's light reappeared, then blinked out the moment I focused. I stopped again. Fog curled in dense spirals around my legs, soft, whispering coils. The candlelight flickered once, inside a window that was not there before. I blinked. Nothing. A shiver crawled up my spine. The forest had become a maze of shadows and whispers, each tree stretching, bending, alive in some impossible way. The light, my guide, shifted endlessly, always ahead, always just out of reach. I stepped forward, barely breathing, feeling the hum in my chest grow stronger, like something beneath the earth pulsing in rhythm with the flicker. The cabin, candle, shadow, they existed only as fragments, never whole, never still. Finally, I paused in the center of the clearing. Silence wrapped the fog around me, the cold pressing in, the earth soft and damp beneath. The light flickered once, barely visible, and then it was gone. I stood alone, fog curling around my boots, breath shallow and slow. Nothing moved, nothing spoke, only the memory of a flickering candle and the quiet horror of a cabin that never stayed in one place. The forest thinned, shadows stretched long under the pale light of the moon. Fog clung to the ground, damp against my skin, pressing in like a silent weight. I stumbled over roots and stones, the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves heavy in the air. Then, through the mist, I saw it a circle of charred stones, blackened and cold. A campfire, long dead. Ash whispered across the ground when I stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of smoke, stale and bitter. The fog wrapped around me, softly pressing, bending the world into silence. Everything else seemed to pause. I in the center of the stones, a scrap of paper, half burnt. I knelt, brushing damp leaves aside. The words were jagged, hurried. Do not follow. I stared. The note trembled in the wind, or maybe it was my hands. A faint hum rose from the forest floor, vibrating through my feet, through my chest, a subtle pulse that didn't belong to me. The silence around me was too thick. No rustle of leaves, no distant bird, no wind. Only the cold stones and the whisper of ash. I could almost hear footsteps that weren't mine. Soft and deliberate, just beyond the fog, I stepped back, fog swirling around my boots. Branches reached out like gnarled hands, the smell of damp bark and moss filling the space between breaths. The note caught the pale light again. Its warning seemed alive. I felt the pull, a curiosity edged with dread. The hum rose, faint but insistent, as if the forest itself was warning me. Each heartbeat echoed, too loud in the heavy stillness. I circled the stones slowly, ash crunching softly beneath me. The campfire, though cold, felt like it had been waiting, a residue of something. Someone, long gone, lingering in the air. The fog shifted. Shadows lengthened and bent unnaturally. I could feel eyes in the mist, watching from somewhere just beyond reach. The note's words carved themselves deeper into my thoughts. Do not follow. I wanted to look away, to leave the clearing, but the hum pulled me forward, soft and impossible, like the memory of a breath. The stone seemed to lean closer, drawing attention to the empty circle, the absence of fire, the faint echo of someone else. A chill pressed down my spine. I imagined flames, flickering and warm, casting dancing shadows. But the circle remained cold, silent, and still. The fog held the memory of heat, and with it, a promise of something unseen. I lingered, breath shallow, listening to forest hold its silence. Every leaf, every branch, every tiny shift in the mist seemed deliberate. The note flapped once, a soft sigh, then fell still again. I stepped away, leaving the stones and the note behind. The fog swallowed the clearing. The hum faded with distance. The forest breathed around me, quiet and expectant, as though the campfire was waiting for someone else to arrive. And I kept walking, leaving the warning behind, feeling the echo of unseen eyes and the weight of forest that remembers even what we forget. Fog clung to the forest floor, pale and heavy, pressing against my legs. Twilight had slipped away, leaving only shadows that seemed to breathe. The scent of wet pine and moss filled the air, sharp and damp, drifting into my chest with every breath. I paused, listening. Nothing moved. Not a leaf, not a bird, not even the wind. Then I saw them. Eyes, pale and unblinking, floating in the mist. They were everywhere at once, watching, waiting. The fog twisted, hiding their forms, yet I felt them everywhere, tracing my steps silently. I blinked and they vanished. The mist seemed empty, but the weight of their gaze lingered on my shoulders. Every nerve tightened, every sense alert that I stepped forward slowly, boots pressing into damp leaves. The smell of wet earth grew stronger, tinged with something faintly metallic. Another glance into the fog. They were back, closer this time, edges of shapes forming just beyond sight. I tried to focus, but the eyes scattered like smoke, leaving only gray whispers and the echo of breath that was not mine. I could feel the fog pressing harder, pushing me into myself, soft footsteps brushing the edges of perception. A branch snapped in the distance. Or maybe it hadn't. The mist seemed to shift with intent, curving around trees like living tendrils. Eyes appeared between trunks, blinked in unison, then were gone again. I stopped, heart drumming quietly against my ribs. The forest was still, too still. The fog swirled at my feet, cold and wet, clinging to my hands. I felt watched, completely alone, yet never truly alone. The shapes in the mist grew faintly brighter, reflecting pale moonlight I wasn't aware of. I wanted to step closer, to see what existed beneath the haze. But each time I approached, they vanished, leaving only a lingering sense of being followed. A low hum rose in the fog, soft and insistent, vibrating in the air and the earth beneath me. I pressed my hands to my ears, tried to anchor myself in the sounds of the forest, but all that remained were the eyes, fading and returning with each heartbeat. I moved forward again, fog curling around my ankles, the cold dampness biting through my jeans. Every step carried the echo of footsteps behind me, slightly faster, slightly heavier, but impossible to place. I stopped at a hollow tree, breath shallow and ragged, palms cold against rough bark. I dared a glance into the mist. The eyes were closer now, pale discs suspended in gray, blinking once, then gone. The forest seemed to sigh, a subtle movement in the branches, a rustle of leaves with no wind. I wanted to turn away, to leave the fog behind, but the sensation of being watched rooted me in place. I exhaled slowly, the damp air filling my lungs with a faint metallic tang. The eyes appeared again, just for a moment, and then dissolved like smoke, leaving only the soft echo of my own breath. I stepped forward, into the thick gray, fog swirling, eyes flickering in and out of sight. Each blink made the world uncertain. Each heartbeat reminded me of the forest's silent awareness. And then, for a long moment, nothing. No eyes, no hum, no shift in the mist. Only the soft crunch of my boots on wet leaves. I walked slowly, cautiously, the forest holding its breath with me, until the fog thinned just enough to make me believe I might be alone again. But I knew it was a lie. The eyes never truly left. They watched from the corners of gray, blinking just beyond certainty, waiting for me to look again. The stream below whispered quietly, dark water curling around stones I couldn't see. Night had settled deep into the forest, fog curling between the trees like soft fingers. A narrow wooden bridge stretched ahead, planks slick with dew, groaning under my weight. The air smelled of damp wood and moss, sharp and heavy in my lungs. I stepped onto the bridge slowly. Each footfall pressed into the silence. Water moved beneath me, shadows shifting along the current, but no shapes came into view. Then I heard it, a soft crunch behind me. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, following. I froze. The bridge creaked beneath my weight. I held my breath. Nothing, no one there, just a faint hum of the forest, the fog pressing in from all sides. I took another step. A footstep echoed behind me again, slightly faster this time, closer, matching my rhythm in a way that made my chest tighten. The night air felt heavier, clinging to my skin, bringing the scent of wet leaves and cold earth. The fog wove around the bridge, hiding the water, hiding what might be following me that I wanted to turn, but the darkness behind me was solid, unbroken, as though looking back would reveal nothing and yet everything. Each plank shifted underfoot, groaning and sighing, the wood damp and soft beneath my shoes. I could feel the vibration of each imagined step, my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. The shadow brushed the edge of the fog. Or maybe it hadn't. The footsteps persisted, soft but insistent, never quickening, never fading. I exhaled slowly, air thick with the scent of pine and wet wood. The bridge seemed endless, stretching farther into the mist than it should. Each step forward was mirrored by something unseen, something that existed only in sound. The stream moved faster beneath me, water slipping over rocks, a gentle hum of movement, and still the footsteps followed. I didn't dare look back. The fear of seeing or not seeing was heavier than the fog itself. I pressed on, hands brushing the damp railing, wood rough and cold against my skin. The air around me trembled with silence, thick and complete, broken only by the soft echo of footsteps that were not mine. Halfway across, a pale light caught the edge of the fog. The bridge shimmered, as if the mist itself had formed a thin, trembling veil. The footsteps paused behind me, then resumed with a faint, deliberate rhythm. I tried to focus on the water below, dark and unreadable, but my eyes kept wandering to the shifting gray behind me, to the space where footsteps existed without a form. Finally, the other side came into view, fog thinning just enough to make the end seem reachable. The footsteps stopped, leaving only silence and the faint, wet scent of the stream. I exhaled, muscles tight, hands cold on the railing. I stepped off the bridge onto solid earth, and the fog swallowed the wooden path behind me. Taking with it the echo of every step, I had never walked alone. The forest thinned, branches lifted, forming a fragile frame around pale light. The ground beneath me softened with moss and fallen leaves. Every breath smelled damp and earthy. I stepped forward, feeling the fog part like silk. The clearing opened, wide and quiet, bathed in a cold, pale glow. Shadows stretched long across the grass, bending at angles that made my chest tighten. Shapes moved at the edge of my vision. They were never still, always retreating, just beyond the reach of my eyes. I blinked, and the clearing seemed empty again. The air hummed faintly, like the vibration of some hidden stone beneath the soil. It pressed against my skin, and the hair on my arms rose without reason. I took a careful step. A soft rustle answered me. Then silence, thick and expectant, as if the clearing held its breath with me. The shapes returned, fleeting glimpses in the fog, pale, shifting forms that might have been trees, or something else entirely. They moved when I moved, receded when I tried to approach, as though the clearing itself refused my presence. The light softened, drifting across the moss like liquid. It painted everything pale, every stone, every leaf, every shadow. The air smelled faintly of smoke and wet wood. A subtle warmth brushed my fingertips, though the breeze carried no heat. I stepped closer, and a shadow darted at the edge of my vision. It paused, paused long enough to make my heart thump, then dissolved back into fog, leaving only emptiness behind. Silence pressed from every side. No wind stirred the trees. No insects whispered from the grass. Even my own breathing seemed too loud, too harsh for the fragile stillness. The clearing widened, revealing shapes crouched low in the fog. I could feel them watching, though I could never see their eyes. Movement flickered in the corner of my vision, like the shimmer of water over stones. A pale glow washed across the field. It wasn't sunlight, not truly, but a soft, impossible light that made shadows stretch in ways that I couldn't follow. The shapes shifted, pulling away into mist, yet somehow closer, as if drawn to my breath. I held still. The grass pressed wet against my boots. The fog wrapped my ankles, curling upward like smoke. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. The shapes seemed to pulse with the hum of the clearing itself. I reached the center. No figure waited, only the pale light and the fog that breathed around me. I sensed eyes, but they left nothing to see. The clearing whispered without sound, and the shadows obeyed its quiet command. I exhaled slowly. The air tasted of stone and frost. I brushed my hand against a moss-covered log. It felt alive. The shadows recoiled, and the light dimmed in response. I stepped back toward the edge. The clearing watched. Every leaf, every tendril of fog, every subtle shift in light seemed deliberate, aware. I realized that the shapes were not fleeing from me, but dancing in some silent rhythm I could not follow. I turned fully, and the forest beyond the clearing waited. The shapes lingered at the edge of my vision, never leaving, never coming closer. The pale light softened, spilling over the ground like liquid glass. The clearing exhaled, and I walked away, leaving only whispers in the fog. The air in the pine forest is cold, and I tease smells of wet earth and rotting leaves out a deep, deep chill that has settled into my bones. I have been walking for a long time, but the path behind me is gone, swallowed by a wall of gray fog. I stop, and I listen. The silence is not silent at all. It's a low, humming pressure against my ears, a static, filling the spaces between the trees. I am completely alone. I have known this for a while now. The knowledge is a heavy stone in my chest. Yet, I am not. There are whispers, not words, just the shape of them, like the rustle of dry leaves skittering over stone. They come from just behind my shoulder, from the dark hollow under a fallen log, from everywhere at once. I turn. Slowly then wide breath is a pale ghost in the fading light. The trees stand like silent sentinels. Their bark is rough under my fingertips. I see nothing. Only the long, purple shadows of the coming night. They stretch and twist between the trunks. But one of the shadows moves. IT detaches itself from the base of an O. IT flows, like spilled ink, into a thicker patch of ferns. I don't feel fear. Not the sharp, panic kind. This is something else, a haunted peace. This is the way things are now. The forest is alive, and it is waiting, a soft crunch of a footstep. Not mine that IT comes from my left. The sound of weight carefully placed on a bed of pine needles. I don't look, I just keep walking. MY own footsteps are too loud, an intrusion in this sacred, watchful quiet. The whispers coil around me now. They are not threatening. They are, curious, a cold breath on the back of my neck. The faint scent of ozone, like after a lightning strike. Another shadow shifts. This one is taller. IT mimics the shape of a person for a single, heart-stopping moment. Then it's just a trick of the deepening gloom. I find a small clearing. The moon is a sliver of bone white in the sky. IT casts a sickly, pale light on a circle of moss. I sit. The ground is damp. The cold seeps through my clothes. I pull my knees to my chest and rest my chin on them. I am a guest here, an audience of one. The forest continues its slow, breathing dance to branch cracks in the distance. The rustling comes closer to the gentle sound, like fingers trailing through tall grass. I close my eyes. The darkness behind my eyelids is no different from the darkness outside. The static hum grows louder. IT fills my head, a soft, whispering ocean. I can feel them now. Presences, shapes of nothing. They move around me in a slow, deliberate circle. I feel the air displace as they pass out a subtle drop in temperature. One of them stops. Right in front of me that I don't open my eyes. I don't need to. There's a pressure in the air before me. The hum focuses into a single, pointed silence that IT is studying me. I accept it. This strange, lonely companionship that I am alone, yet surrounded, haunted, yet at peace. The pressure recedes. The soft footsteps resume their circling. The whispers return to their wordless murmur. After a time, I open my eyes. The clearing is empty. The moon is gone. The only light comes from a faint, phosphorescent glow in the tree trunks to the soft, fungal blue. I lie back on the moss. IT is cold and wet. I look up at the canopy. The stars are hidden. There's only a ceiling of shifting, breathing black. The whispers are a lullaby now to a story told in a language I will never understand. But I feel its meaning. IT is a story of the woods, out of the deep, old dark, and of me. A single, final shadow detaches from the tree line that IT doesn't move. That IT simply stands at the edge of the clearing, at a part of the waiting. I let out a long, slow breath and my eyes grow heavy. The static hum is inside me now at a part of my blood MY heartbeat. I am not afraid. I am just here, alone among the shadows. And the shadows are finally accepting me.